The sound of a Winchester rifle being cocked echoed across the windswept valley as Catherine Hayes stood on her porch, her sun-bronzed face set in determination that belied her 24 years. The early morning light of May 1878 cast long shadows across her land, the Double Eight ranch outside Leadville, Colorado, the same land her father had died protecting just 6 months prior. "I ain't asking again, Miss Hayes," Jeremiah Blackstone called from atop his dappled stallion, flanked by 3 hired guns. "Your pa owed me, and this land's the payment. You got till sundown tomorrow to clear out." Catherine's grip tightened on her father's rifle. "My father owed you nothing, Blackstone. This land is mine by law and by right. I suggest you and your men turn around before I decide my cattle need more grazing room where you're standing." The wealthy rancher's face darkened. At 45, Jeremiah Blackstone owned the largest spread in the territory, the Diamond B, and wasn't accustomed to being denied. "No woman can run a ranch alone. You'll fail, and when you do, I'll be there to take what's mine, one way or another." As Blackstone and his men retreated toward the horizon, Catherine felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the spring mountain breeze. She knew his threat wasn't idle. Water was scarce this season, and her land contained the most reliable spring in the county. "Miss Hayes." Her ranch hand, elderly Tom Wilson, appeared at her side. "Those supplies from town ain't gonna fetch themselves. You still planning on going?" Catherine nodded, lowering the rifle. "Blackstone thinks he can starve us out. We need those supplies more than ever now." The 2-hour ride into Leadville gave Catherine time to think. Since her father's passing from pneumonia last November, she'd managed to keep the ranch running, but just barely. The Double H was down to 4 hands, including Tom, barely enough to manage their reduced herd of 200 head of cattle. If they couldn't make the drive to Denver by summer's end, they'd lose everything. Leadville was bustling with miners and fortune seekers drawn by the silver boom. Catherine tied her chestnut mare outside the general store, straightening her simple blue riding dress before entering. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped in. "Catherine Hayes, as I live and breathe." Martha Simmons, the proprietor's wife, greeted her warmly. "Haven't seen you in town for near a month." "Been busy at the ranch," Catherine replied, handing over her supply list. "Hoping to get these loaded up before midday." Martha's face fell as she scanned the paper. "Can only give you half of what you're asking on credit, dear." "Your account's getting rather substantial." Catherine's heart sank. "I understand. We'll take what we can get and pay the rest when the cattle drive's done." As Martha tallied the order, the bell jingled again. 2 men entered, one older with a silver-streaked beard, the other younger with broad shoulders and a quiet, watchful demeanor. Both wore trail dust and the unmistakable look of cowboys who'd been riding hard. "Oscar Ellison." The younger man introduced himself to the storekeeper with a tip of his hat, revealing dark hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. "My Uncle Hank and I are looking to resupply. Just drove our herd up from Texas." Catherine couldn't help noticing the way his gaze lingered on her before returning to his conversation. She finished her business quickly, arranging for the supplies to be loaded into her wagon. Outside, she was checking the harness when a commotion drew her attention. 3 of Blackstone's men were blocking her wagon. "Seems like a shame for a pretty lady to be hauling all these supplies alone," one drawled, his hand resting too casually on his holster. "I manage fine," Catherine replied coldly. "Step aside." "Blackstone says to give you a message. He's damming up the creek that runs through his property. Says you might want to reconsider his offer before your cattle start dying of thirst." Catherine's blood ran cold. The creek was the lifeblood of her ranch during the dry season. That creek's been open water rights for 30 years, she argued. He already has men working on it now. Another man interrupted with a cruel smile. A deep voice cut through the tension. Excuse me, gentlemen, but you're blocking my way. Oscar Ellison stood behind them, arms crossed over his chest. Despite his calm tone, there was steel in his voice. This ain't your business, stranger, the lead man spat. Well, now I'm making it my business, Oscar replied, his hand casually moving to rest on his holster. When 3 men corner one woman, that strikes me as poor manners. A tense silence stretched between them until finally the men backed down. Blackstone ain't gonna forget this, one muttered as they stalked away. Thank you, Catherine said once they'd gone, but that wasn't necessary. I've handled worse. Oscar's mouth quirked into a half smile. No doubt, but my mother raised me better than to stand by while a lady's being harassed. Oscar Ellison. He extended his hand. Catherine Hayes, she replied, shaking it briefly. I own the Double H Ranch south of town. Hayes. His eyes narrowed in thought. Any relation to Samuel Hayes? Catherine stiffened. My father, you knew him. Met him once in Denver years back. Good man, gave me advice when I was just starting out. He hesitated. I heard he passed. My condolences. Thank you. Catherine climbed onto her wagon seat. If you'll excuse me, I need to get back to my ranch. Apparently, I have a water crisis to deal with. Oscar stepped back, but his expression was thoughtful. Mind if I ride alongside you a ways? My uncle and I are looking to settle our herd, and I'd like to know more about the area. Catherine hesitated, then nodded. Suit yourself, Mr. Ellison. As they traveled, Oscar explained that he and his uncle had driven 500 head of longhorns up from Texas, looking for new grazing lands after drought had devastated their home range. Colorado's got its own troubles, Catherine warned. Water rights are becoming a battlefield, and men like Jeremiah Blackstone don't play fair. Oscar listened intently as she outlined her situation, how Blackstone had been pressuring her to sell since her father's death, how he controlled most of the surrounding land, and how his latest move to dam the creek could ruin her. Seems to me, Oscar said thoughtfully as they neared her property line, that a partnership might benefit us both. You've got land but need hands and cattle. I've got both but need land. Catherine reined her horses to a stop, studying him skeptically. Mr. Ellison, if you're suggesting a business arrangement, he clarified quickly. My herd needs grazing land. Your ranch needs more cattle for the drive. We could combine forces through the season, split the profits, and both come out ahead. And why would you help a stranger? Catherine asked, suspicion evident in her tone. Oscar's expression grew serious. Because I know what it's like to have someone try to take what's yours, and because your father once helped me when he didn't have to. He paused. At least meet my uncle, see our herd, then decide. Catherine considered the offer as they crested the final hill overlooking her ranch. In the valley below, the Double H spread before them, a modest but well-built main house, bunkhouse, barn, and corrals. Beyond, the grazing land stretched toward distant mountains. Your father built something fine here, Oscar commented. He did, Catherine agreed softly. And I won't let Blackstone destroy it. Then let me help you fight, Oscar said simply. Something in his steady gaze made Catherine nod. Bring your herd tomorrow, we'll talk terms. That evening, Catherine explained the potential arrangement to her foreman, Tom Wilson, and her 3 remaining hands. Don't trust him, advised Miguel Sanchez, who'd worked for her father for 15 years. Men always want something. We need the help, Miguel, Tom countered. Miss Catherine can't fight Blackstone alone, and we're short-handed as it is. If his herd is healthy and his offer fair, it could save the ranch, Catherine said. but I won't decide until I've seen what he brings." The next morning, Catherine was inspecting the creek that bordered her property when she heard the distant rumble of hooves. Riding to the North Ridge, she watched as a massive herd of longhorns appeared, guided by a dozen cowboys. At their head rode Oscar and an older man she assumed was his uncle. The cattle were magnificent, lean from the drive, but clearly well-bred stock that would fetch premium prices in Denver. As the herd approached, Oscar broke away and rode to meet her. "Miss Hayes," he called, reining in his chestnut gelding beside her mare. "I hope you don't mind, but we brought a little something with us." He gestured to the herd. "You certainly don't do things halfway, Mr. Ellison," Catherine replied, impressed despite herself. "Oscar, please." His smile was warm. "And this is my uncle, Hank Ellison." The older man tipped his hat. "Miss Hayes, fine piece of land you got here." Catherine studied them both. There was a family resemblance in their strong jawlines and the crow's feet around their eyes from years squinting in the sun. "Let's discuss terms," she said, leading them back to the ranch house. Over coffee at her kitchen table, Oscar laid out his proposal. His crew would help maintain both herds through summer, combining forces for the drive to Denver in August. The profits would be split according to the percentage of cattle each contributed, with adjustments for land use and supplies. "This agreement's just for the season," Catherine clarified. "The Double H remains mine." "Of course," Oscar agreed. "Though if things work out, we could discuss future arrangements." Something in his tone made Catherine look up sharply, but his expression revealed nothing beyond business interest. "One more thing," she added. "Blackstone's damming my water. Before we shake on anything, you should know what you're getting into." Oscar exchanged glances with his uncle. "We noticed the work on our way in. It won't stand." "Blackstone has the sheriff in his pocket," Catherine warned. "Then we won't be using the sheriff," Hank stated matter-of-factly. "There are other ways to solve water disputes out here." Catherine hesitated, then extended her hand. "We have a deal, gentlemen." The next week passed in a flurry of activity as the two operations merged. Oscar's cowboys moved into the bunkhouse and set up additional tents nearby. The combined herds grazed the Double H pastures while the men repaired fences, reinforced buildings, and established routines. Catherine found herself working alongside Oscar daily, impressed by his knowledge and work ethic. Unlike many men who'd attempted to court her in the past, he never questioned her abilities or tried to take over. Instead, he consulted her, respected her decisions, and occasionally challenged her thinking in ways that improved their plans. "Your father taught you well," Oscar remarked one evening as they tallied supplies. "Not many women could run a ranch like this." "Not many are given the chance," Catherine replied. "My father had no sons, so he taught me everything he knew. Said I had a better head for business than any man he'd met." "He wasn't wrong," Oscar chuckled. "You've spotted 3 errors in my calculations tonight alone." Their easy camaraderie was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats. Tom Wilson burst into the house without knocking. "Miss Catherine." "The dam's complete. Creek's already running dry at the south end." Oscar was on his feet immediately. "How long before the pastures are affected?" 3 days, maybe 4 if we're lucky," Tom replied grimly. Catherine's mind raced. "Without that water, half their grazing lands would be useless within a week. We need to speak with Blackstone." "No," Oscar countered. "We need to destroy that dam." "That's destruction of property," Catherine argued. "He'd have the law on us." "Only if he can prove who did it." Oscar's eyes held a dangerous glint. "And water rights in this territory follow the doctrine of prior appropriation. Your father established his claim long before Blackstone." Catherine studied him. "You know a lot about water law for a cattleman." Let's just say this isn't my first water dispute, Oscar replied. Give me 2 men and 1 night. The dam won't be there come morning. I'm coming with you, Catherine stated. Oscar started to object, but her raised hand stopped him. My ranch, my water, my risk. That night, under a moonless sky, Catherine, Oscar, Miguel, and young ranch hand Billy Reed rode north toward Blackstone's property. They carried dynamite borrowed from a friendly mine foreman in Leadville who owed Catherine's father a favor. The dam was crude but effective, a barrier of rocks, logs, and packed earth across the narrow portion of the creek. 2 guards dozed nearby, rifles across their laps. Oscar signaled to Miguel, who circled wide to create a distraction with controlled gunfire away from the dam. When the guards scrambled to investigate, Oscar and Catherine hurried forward, placing dynamite charges at strategic points. Ready, Oscar whispered, unspooling the long fuse. Catherine nodded, her heart pounding. For the double H, for us, Oscar replied, striking a match. They retreated to safety as the fuse sizzled toward the dam. The explosion shattered the night, sending debris skyward as water surged through the breach. By the time the guards returned, Catherine and Oscar were long gone, the rush of water covering their tracks. Dawn broke over the double H with the creek flowing freely again. Catherine stood on her porch, watching the sunrise with a mixture of triumph and apprehension. He'll know it was us, she said when Oscar joined her, offering a cup of coffee. Let him suspect. Proving it is another matter. Oscar leaned against the porch rail. Besides, what we did was technically legal under territorial water law, even if our methods were unorthodox. Catherine smiled despite herself. Is that how you justify all your questionable decisions, Mr. Ellison? Legal technicalities? Only the ones worth making, he replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her look away first. Their moment was interrupted by the distant sound of riders approaching, at least a dozen, led by Jeremiah Blackstone himself. Here comes trouble, Oscar muttered, straightening. Stay behind me. Not a chance, Catherine retorted, retrieving her rifle from inside the door. Blackstone reined his horse to a stop in the yard, his men fanning out behind him. His face was mottled with rage. You think you're clever, Hayes, blowing up my dam in the night like a common criminal. I don't know what you're talking about, Blackstone, Catherine replied coolly. But I'm mighty pleased to see the creek flowing as it should be. According to territorial law, that water's always been part of the double H water rights. You've made a powerful enemy, girl, Blackstone snarled, his gaze shifting to Oscar. And who's this? Your new protector. Oscar Ellison, he introduced himself, his stance casual but alert. Miss Hayes and I have a business arrangement. Well, Ellison, you've backed the wrong horse. This little partnership won't save her ranch. Oscar smiled thinly. That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Blackstone. Take it however you like, but know this: that dam was just the beginning. By summer's end, the double H will be mine. Blackstone's gaze returned to Catherine. Unless you're ready to be reasonable about my offer. My answer hasn't changed, Catherine stated firmly. Blackstone sneered. We'll see how stubborn you remain when your cattle start dying. There are more ways to divert water than one dam. After Blackstone departed, Oscar found Catherine in the barn, angrily brushing her mare with enough force to make the animal sidestep nervously. Easy, Oscar said, approaching slowly. You'll wear a hole in that poor horse. Catherine slowed her movements, her shoulders dropping. He won't stop, Oscar. That's what terrifies me. He has resources we don't, connections we can't match. He has neither your determination nor your righteousness, Oscar countered, gently taking the brush from her hand. And now he doesn't have your water either. Catherine looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Why are you really helping me? The truth this time. Oscar's expression grew serious. Your father saved my life once. I was young, foolish, got caught in a bad situation in Denver. He could have let me hang, but he spoke for me, gave me a second chance. He paused. I swore if I ever had the chance to repay that debt, I would. So this is about obligation, paying a debt. It started that way, Oscar admitted. But now, he hesitated, his eyes searching hers. Now it's about something else entirely. The air between them charged with unspoken feeling, but Catherine stepped back, breaking the moment. I need to check the south pasture, she said quickly. The water should be reaching it by now. Oscar watched her go, a small smile playing at his lips. I'll be here when you're ready to finish this conversation, Catherine Hayes, he murmured to himself. Over the next weeks, the partnership flourished. Oscar's experienced cowboys complemented Catherine's smaller crew, and together they prepared for the summer cattle drive. The combined herd grew stronger, and the Double H began to thrive again. But Blackstone wasn't finished. First came rumors in town that Catherine was in financial trouble and would soon be selling. Then supplies they'd ordered mysteriously disappeared from wagons. A fence line was cut, allowing cattle to wander dangerously close to a steep ravine. He's trying to wear us down, Catherine observed one evening as she and Oscar tallied the day's losses, 3 steers injured from the fence cutting. Death by 1,000 cuts. Then we need to change tactics, Oscar replied. Stop being reactive and take the fight to him. What do you suggest? More dynamite, Oscar grinned. Nothing so dramatic, but there's a cattle auction in Denver next week. Blackstone usually buys breeding stock there to improve his herd. What if we outbid him on every lot he wants? We can't afford that, Catherine protested. We don't need to win every bid, just drive up his prices and secure a few key lots, hit him in his pocketbook while improving our own stock. The plan worked beautifully. Oscar, Catherine, and Hank traveled to Denver, where they strategically bid against Blackstone at every turn. By the end of the auction, he'd paid nearly double market value for his purchases, while they secured 3 prime bulls at reasonable prices. The look on his face was worth every penny, Catherine laughed as they celebrated in a Denver restaurant that evening. I've never seen a man turn so many shades of purple. Oscar raised his glass. To the Double H and its formidable owner. Hank excused himself early, leaving Catherine and Oscar alone at their corner table. The restaurant was dimly lit, the piano player in the corner adding to the intimate atmosphere. I've been meaning to ask you, Catherine said after a comfortable silence. What happened in Denver? With my father? Oscar swirled the whiskey in his glass before answering. I was 22, thought I knew everything. Got involved with some men running a scheme selling cattle that weren't theirs to sell. I didn't know they were rustled at first, but when I found out, he sighed. I was in too deep. When the law caught up, your father happened to be in town. He recognized me from a cattle drive the previous year, spoke to my character, said I deserved a second chance. That sounds like him, Catherine smiled sadly. He believed people could change if given the opportunity. He was right. I went back to Texas, started honest. Everything I have now I built the right way. Oscar met her gaze steadily. I need you to know that, Catherine. I believe you, she said softly, surprising herself with how completely she meant it. The carriage ride back to their hotel was quiet, both lost in thought. When they reached her door, Catherine hesitated. Thank you for today, she said, for helping me fight back. You don't need to thank me, Oscar replied, his voice low. You would have found a way without me. Perhaps. But I'm glad I didn't have to. Their eyes held, the moment stretching between them like a thread pulled taut. Oscar took a half step forward, then stopped himself. Good night, Catherine, he said finally, tipping his hat before turning to go. Oscar, she called softly, making him pause. I'm glad my father helped you that day." His smile in response stayed with her long after she'd closed her door. Back at the Double H, tensions with Blackstone escalated. Two of Oscar's men were ambushed while checking fence lines. Though they escaped with minor injuries, the message was clear: Blackstone was through with subtle tactics. "We need more men," Hank argued during a council of war in Catherine's kitchen. "We can't afford more men," she countered. "We can't afford not to have them," Oscar insisted. Blackstone's playing for keeps now. The solution came unexpectedly the next day when 3 riders approached the ranch cowboys looking for work who'd heard rumors of a range war brewing. "Word spreading," the leader explained. "Folks are taking sides." Blackstone's made enemies all over the territory with his water grabs and strong arm tactics. We figured it was time someone stood up to him. By the end of the week, 5 more men had joined their cause, willing to work for reduced wages just to be part of the fight. The Double HTK's defenses strengthened, with round-the-clock patrols and improved fortifications. One evening in late June, Catherine found Oscar alone by the creek, staring thoughtfully at the water. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, settling beside him on a fallen log. "Just wondering what comes after," he replied. "After the cattle drive after Blackstone. Assuming we win," Catherine added, "we'll win." Oscar's conviction was absolute. "But then what? Will you keep running the Double H alone? Will I take my herd back to Texas?" The questions hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to voice. "I don't know," Catherine admitted. "For so long I've only focused on survival, on keeping my father's legacy intact. I haven't let myself think beyond that." Oscar turned to face her, his expression serious. "I have." Catherine's breath caught as he took her hand gently in his. "I came here to repay a debt, but I found something I wasn't looking for," he continued. "Someone I wasn't expecting." "Oscar, let me finish," he said softly. "I'm not asking for answers now. I'm just asking you to consider possibilities. A future where neither of us has to choose between what we've built and what we feel." Catherine studied their joined hands, her heart racing. "I need time." "Take all the time you need," Oscar replied. "I'm not going anywhere." The moment was interrupted by urgent hoofbeats. One of their scouts galloped into the yard, shouting for Oscar and Catherine. "Blackstone's men are driving 100 head of their cattle onto the north pasture, our best grazing land." Oscar was on his feet instantly. "Saddle up, get everyone." Within minutes, they were riding hard toward the north boundary where they found Blackstone's foreman, Curtis Jenkins, directing cowboys to cut fence lines and drive cattle through. "That's far enough, Jenkins," Oscar called, his rifle ready. Behind him, a dozen Double H riders fanned out in a defensive line. Jenkins sneered. "Public grazing land, Ellison. First come, first served." "This is Double H property," Catherine countered, riding forward. "And you know it." "Not according to the new survey," Jenkins replied smugly, producing a document. "Governor's office says the boundary's been mismarked for years. This pasture belongs to whoever claims it." Oscar dismounted, examining the paper. "This is forged," he declared. "The governor's seal isn't right." "Tell it to the judge," Jenkins laughed. "Meanwhile, our cattle stay." The standoff grew tense, with men on both sides fingering their weapons. Just as it seemed violence was inevitable, Catherine raised her voice. "Let them stay." "What?" Oscar turned to her in shock. "Let them stay," she repeated calmly. "For now, we're not starting a shooting war today." After Jenkins and his men departed, Catherine explained her reasoning. "That document is obviously fake, but fighting now would give Blackstone exactly what he wants: a reason to bring in the law against us. We need to be smarter." "So we just let him take our best pasture?" Oscar demanded. "No," Catherine replied, her eyes glinting with determination. We go to Denver ourselves. I have an old family friend who works in the land office. If Blackstone can forge documents, we can find the real ones." 3 days later, Catherine returned from Denver triumphant, carrying official papers confirming the Double H boundaries as her father had recorded them. More importantly, she brought a territorial marshal willing to enforce the legitimate claim. The sight of Blackstone's cattle being driven off the disputed pasture under official supervision was sweet vindication. But everyone knew the conflict was far from over. July brought oppressive heat, and the final preparations for the cattle drive to Denver. The combined herd, now nearly 700 strong, would bring a handsome profit if they could get them to market safely. 2 nights before they were set to leave, disaster struck. Catherine was awakened by shouts and the smell of smoke. Running outside in her nightdress, she saw flames engulfing the barn. "The horses!" she screamed, running toward the blaze. Oscar caught her around the waist. "It's too late for the barn," he yelled over the roar of the fire. "Focus on keeping it from spreading." Through the night, every hand fought the fire. By dawn, the barn was a smoldering ruin, but they'd saved the house, bunkhouse, and miraculously, most of the livestock. 6 horses had been lost, along with crucial supplies for the drive. "This was no accident," Oscar declared, holding up the remains of a kerosene lamp that had been thrown through a window. "Blackstone's making his move before the drive. Without those horses and supplies, we can't move the herd," Catherine said, despair creeping into her voice as she surveyed the destruction. "Yes, we can," Oscar insisted. "We'll adapt, send riders to neighboring ranches, call in every favor your father ever earned." The response from the community surprised even Catherine. By nightfall, 4 neighboring ranches had sent horses, supplies, and even additional cowboys to help with the drive. Blackstone had made many enemies over the years, and they rallied to Catherine's aid. "See," Oscar said as they sorted through the donated supplies. "You're not alone in this fight." Catherine looked up at him, ash still smudging her face from the fire. "I'm beginning to understand that." The cattle drive departed as scheduled, leaving a skeleton crew to protect the ranch. Oscar, Catherine, and 30 experienced cowboys guided the massive herd north toward Denver, a journey expected to take 2 weeks. 4 days in, they received word that Blackstone's men had made another attempt on the Double H, trying to divert the creek again, but the ranch hands had driven them off. "He's getting desperate," Oscar observed as they made camp that night. "He knows if we make it to Denver with this herd, you'll have enough money to fight him for years. Then he'll try to stop the drive next," Catherine reasoned. She was right. On the 7th day, as they approached a narrow canyon that offered the only practical passage through a rocky ridge, they spotted riders blocking the way ahead. "Blackstone's men," Hank confirmed after scouting. "At least 20, and they've set up firing positions on the canyon walls." "Going around would cost us 3 days, Catherine calculated, days we don't have if we want to make the market date. Oscar studied the terrain thoughtfully. "There's another way. We split the herd. Send most men and cattle on the longer route, while a small group creates a distraction at the canyon." "A suicide mission," Catherine protested. "Not if we're smart," Oscar countered. "We're not trying to win a gunfight, just create enough chaos to make them think the entire herd is coming through. Then we slip away in the confusion." After heated debate, the plan was set. Oscar, Catherine, and 5 others would approach the canyon at dawn with a small number of cattle, creating the impression of the drive's advance guard. Meanwhile, Hank would lead the main herd on the longer route. "You don't have to come," Oscar told Catherine as they prepared. "This is the most dangerous part." "It's my ranch, my cattle, my fight," she replied firmly. "I'm coming." The next morning, their small band approached the canyon entrance, driving about 50 head of cattle before them. As expected, warning shots rang out from the ridge. "That's close enough," called a voice they recognized as Jenkins. "Turn back or we start shooting for real." Instead of retreating, Oscar gave the signal. The cowboys fired their pistols into the air and let out war whoops that echoed through the canyon. The startled cattle bolted forward into the passage, creating a living barrier of panicked longhorns. In the ensuing chaos, Blackstone's men struggled to take aim without hitting the valuable cattle. Oscar, Catherine, and their cowboys used the confusion to break through the blockade, spurring their horses alongside the stampeding herd. Bullets whizzed overhead as they raced through the canyon. Catherine felt a sharp burn across her upper arm but kept riding. Only when they emerged from the far side did they rein in. "Everyone all right?" Oscar called, doing a quick count. All had made it, though 2 men had minor wounds. "You're hit," he said to Catherine, noticing the blood on her sleeve. "Just a graze," she assured him, though the pain was intense. "We need to keep moving before they regroup." They rode hard for hours, eventually circling back to rendezvous with the main herd. By the time Blackstone's men realized they'd been duped, the Double H cattle were safely beyond reach. That night, as Oscar cleaned and bandaged Catherine's wound, their eyes met in the flickering campfire light. "You were magnificent today," he said softly. "Braver than any man I've ever ridden with." "We all did what needed doing," she replied, wincing slightly as he tightened the bandage. "Catherine," Oscar's voice dropped lower, "when this drive is over, when Blackstone's dealt with, we need to talk about the future." She held his gaze steadily. "I've been thinking about possibilities like you suggested." And his hand remained on her arm, warm and steady. "And I'm beginning to see some I like very much." The rest of the drive proceeded without major incident. When they reached Denver, the cattle fetched top dollar enough to pay off the Double H debts and secure its operation for the coming year. As they celebrated their success in Denver, news arrived from Leadville. Blackstone had finally overplayed his hand. His forged boundary documents had drawn the attention of territorial officials, and investigations had uncovered a pattern of fraud and intimidation. Warrants had been issued for his arrest. "It's over," Catherine breathed, hardly daring to believe it. "We won." "You won," Oscar corrected her. "This was always your fight. I just helped even the odds." The return journey to the Double H was triumphant. The ranch hands who'd stayed behind had maintained the property admirably, and repairs to the burned barn were already underway. As life settled into a new rhythm, Catherine found Oscar one evening on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, joining him at the railing. "Second most beautiful sight in Colorado," he replied, his eyes on her rather than the landscape. Catherine smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in months. "I've been thinking about your question, about what comes after, and have you found an answer?" Oscar asked, turning to face her fully. "I have." She took a deep breath. "The Double H is my home, my legacy. I won't leave it." Disappointment flickered across Oscar's features before he masked it. "I understand." "But," Catherine continued, stepping closer, "it's a big ranch. Too big for one person to run alone." Hope returned to his eyes. "What are you saying, Catherine?" "I'm saying I need a partner, in business and—" She faltered, then found her courage. "In life. Someone who respects what I've built but isn't afraid to build alongside me. Someone who sees me as an equal." Oscar took her hands in his. "I think I know someone who fits that description." "Do you now?" she teased, her eyes bright with unshed tears of happiness. "Catherine Hayes," Oscar said solemnly, "I came here to repay a debt and found a future I never imagined. I love you, your strength, your determination, your heart. I don't want to take you away from this land. I want to share it with you." "Is that a proposal, Mr. Ellison?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a beginning," he replied. Moving to the edge of the porch, he gestured toward the pastures where their combined herds grazed peacefully. "My cattle, your land." Turning back to her with love in his eyes, he finished, "Now it's ours." Catherine's answer was to step into his embrace, her lips finding his as the last light of day bathed them in golden promise. 3 weeks later, they were married under the great oak tree that had stood sentinel over the Double H for generations. The ceremony was attended by ranch hands, neighbors, and even a few friendly faces from Leadville. Hank Ellison stood proudly beside his nephew, while Tom Wilson gave Catherine away in her father's stead. As autumn painted the Colorado landscape in vibrant hues, the Double HE Ranch, as it came to be known, prospered. Oscar and Catherine worked side by side, their complementary strengths creating something greater than either could have built alone. Jeremiah Blackstone eventually stood trial for his crimes, resulting in heavy fines and the loss of much of his land holdings. The Diamond B was divided and sold at auction, with the Double HE acquiring the valuable water rights that had sparked the conflict. Winter came with heavy snows that blanketed the ranch in peaceful white. In the cozy warmth of the main house, now filled with both Catherine's heirlooms and Oscar's treasured books, the couple made plans for spring and the years beyond. "I've been thinking," Catherine said one evening as they sat before the fire, "about adding on to the house." Oscar looked up from his ledger. "More room for supplies?" "No," she smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "More room for family." Oscar's expression transformed from confusion to wonder. "Are you saying?" Catherine nodded, her eyes shining. "Come spring, there'll be another Ellison at the Double HE." The joy that filled the room that night was matched only by the arrival of their son, Samuel Oscar Ellison. The following May born in the same house where Catherine had entered the world, on land that would one day be his legacy. As the years passed, the Double HE became one of the most prosperous ranches in Colorado. Oscar and Catherine had 2 more children, a daughter, Elizabeth, and another son, Thomas. The family flourished, as did the land under their stewardship. Sometimes, on summer evenings when the day's work was done, Oscar and Catherine would sit on their porch watching their children play in the yard where they had once faced down enemies and forged their partnership. "You ever think about how it all began?" Catherine would ask, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. "Every day," Oscar would reply, squeezing her fingers gently. "Every single day." And in those moments, with the sun setting behind the mountains that had witnessed their struggle and triumph, they knew that all they had endured had led them exactly where they were meant to be, together on land that was truly theirs.